Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're focusing on a really significant anniversary. It's the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Dachau, which began, well, date was April 29th, 1945.
That's right. And for this deep dive, we've gathered quite a range of sources. We've got news articles, KGOU, NEPM providing some perspectives,
Okay.
and crucially, powerful firsthand accounts. There's one from Brigadier General Felix L. Sparks. He's one of the liberators.
Oh,
And accounts from survivors, too, plus information from the Dachau Memorial site itself and some context from the U.S. Army archives.
so quite a lot to draw on. Our mission, really, is to understand what actually happened during the liberation. You know, the immediate impact it had on survivors, on the soldiers who arrived, and I guess the lasting legacy of Dachau.
Exactly. What does it mean today?
Okay, let's start with Dachau itself. It wasn't just any camp, was it? It had, well, a specific dark purpose from the very beginning.
Absolutely. You see, Dachau was established way back in March 1933. They set it up on the grounds of an old gunpowder and ammunition factory.
March 33. That's really early.
It is. It holds the grim distinction of being the very first official Nazi concentration camp. And tragically, it was also the longest running. It operated right through from 33 until it was liberated in April 45. 12 years.
12 years. And the number of people imprisoned. It started relatively small, right, with political opponents?
Yeah, initially about 5,000 political prisoners, but that number just exploded over the years.
How many are we talking about eventually?
Well, Dachau became this huge system. The main camp, plus this network of subcamps, I think there were about 30 major ones and over 120 smaller ones dotted around.
Wow.
Altogether, they imprisoned over 200,000 people from all over Europe, Jews, clergy, political dissidents, homosexuals, Roma, Sinti, people from France, Poland, Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, Russia, you name it.
And these subcamps, what were they for?
Often tied to industry. Factories, quarries, places where prisoners were forced into brutal slave labor. It was all part of the Nazi war machine and economic exploitation.
It's horrifying to think about. And the human cost within Dachau itself.
The death toll was... well, it's staggering. We know for sure that at least 40,000 people died there. 40,000. And that was from murder, disease.
Both. Direct murder, absolutely, but also starvation, disease that ran rampant because of the conditions, exhaustion, just utter neglect and brutality.
We have some accounts from survivors, don't we? They really bring those conditions to life in a terrible way.
Yes, Elly Gotz, a survivor, he described it vividly. Constant 12-hour work shifts, trying to sleep on just hard wooden boards.
No bedding.
Little to none.
Yeah.
And barely any food, almost no chance to wash properly. He talked about lice infestations being everywhere. It was systematic dehumanization.
Designed to break people.
Completely. Break their spirit, break their bodies, make them vulnerable.
And Gotz also mentioned something truly awful, having to carry the bodies of the dead constantly.
Yeah. Imagine the psychological toll of that, day in, day out. Another survivor, Convoy, he described his job, loading bodies onto a wheelbarrow to take them to be burned.
Okay. And he mentioned this detail. They had to remove gold teeth from the corpses first.
It just shows the utter lack of humanity, exploiting people even after death.
Absolutely. So you have this backdrop of years of unimaginable suffering, and then April 1945 rolls around and the Allied forces are getting close.
Right. The end of the war is in sight. What was happening inside Dachau then? It sounds like things got even worse.
They did. It was chaos. As the Allies pushed into Bavaria, the Nazi command, they basically tried to eliminate the evidence, including the prisoners.
Ow.
Well, in mid-April, they forced about 15,000 prisoners from the subcamps into the main Dachau camp, which was already horribly overcrowded.
That must have been catastrophic.
It was. Typhus just ripped through the weakened population. And then, incredibly, just days before liberation, another 2,000 inmates arrived.
From where?
They'd been on a forced death march from the Flossenburg camp. At the same time, the Dachau guards were forcing thousands out of the camp.
Out.
Marching them south. About 7,000 people. The assumption is they were being marched to their deaths to prevent them being found alive.
So, utter desperation and cruelty right up to the last minute. And then, the Americans arose.
Yes, finally. April 29th, 1945. It wasn't just one unit, though. Soldiers from the U.S. Army's 42nd and 45th Infantry Divisions and the 20th Armored Division, they all kind of converged on the camp from different directions.
Part of the wider push.
Exactly. The 45th Infantry Division, the Thunderbirds, they were among the first to actually reach the main prisoner compound, and they found, Well, over 30,000 living prisoners still inside.
30,000 survivors. And we have that account from Brigadier General Sparks, who was leading elements of the 45th. What did he say?
He described getting the order, take the camp. He said they had to scale the wall because the main gate was secured. There was a firefight, brief but fierce, with the remaining SS guards and their dogs.
And his first impression, you mentioned something about the size.
Yeah, he noted that the camp was so huge, with all the barracks and administrative buildings, that you couldn't immediately see the actual prisoner enclosure. It masked the horror initially.
Until they got inside the wire.
Right, and then the reality hit them. Sparks used really strong language. He said there are no words for Dachau. Even for his men, veterans of, I think, 6 previous campaigns.
Battle-hardened soldiers.
Exactly. They were physically sickened. He talked about the overwhelming rot and stench and filth, just tangible evidence of human cruelty that was, for them, beyond comprehension, beyond anything they'd seen in combat.
Because this wasn't combat, was it? This was something else entirely.
It was systematic extermination, industrialized murder and suffering, a fundamentally different kind of horror.
Sparks also mentioned a strange encounter, didn't he? With a Red Cross representative.
Yes, apparently a representative from the Swiss Red Cross was there with 2 SS troopers trying to formally surrender the camp.
Surrender with the SS, that's odd.
It is. It raises questions, doesn't it? Maybe an attempt at negotiation, or... It's hard to say exactly what was going on in those chaotic final moments.
Amidst all this horror, from the liberators' perspective, we also need to remember the survivors. Their experience of that day.
Absolutely crucial. We mentioned John Reno earlier. Her granddaughter shared that she barely spoke about her time in Dachau, but the one thing she did say was, "I remember the day the Americans came."
Just that sentence. It says everything.
It really does. It captures the absolute significance of that moment, the dividing line between hell and, well, the possibility of life.
And Elly Gotz. His memories so vivid, so heartbreaking. Seeing the American Jeep.
Yes, his immediate reaction was to run to his dying father. He shook him, saying, "Father, we made it. They promised to kill us. We are alive and the Americans are here."
And his father's reply.
His father, barely conscious, just said, "Oh, that's good. Have you got the bread?" It just grounds that huge, monumental moment of liberation and the most basic, desperate human need after years of starvation. Even in that moment, survival instincts took over.
It shows how stripped down their existence had become. But the horror for the liberators. It wasn't just the sight of the living, was it? They found much worse.
Tragically, yes. They found the undeniable proof of mass murder. Thousands and thousands of dead bodies.
Right.
Piled up in railway cars that had just arrived, full of more victims who died en route, in sheds near the crematorium, stacked inside the barracks themselves.
We have official reports, right? Lieutenant Colonel Walter Fellens.
Yes, his report is stark. He documented over 4,000 bodies in a warehouse in the crematorium and over 1,000 dead bodies in the barracks. The numbers are just mind-numbing.
Impossible to truly visualize.
And it wasn't just the sight. Multiple accounts mentioned the smell, this distinctive smell, the stench of death. They noticed it miles away before they even saw the camp.
A warning of what was to come.
An unforgettable, sickening warning. And then the descriptions of the rooms, like near the crematorium.
Then they say.
Rooms stacked almost to the ceiling with tangled human bodies. One description called it like some maniac's woodpile.
That image. It's
Right.
just indelible. Utterly chilling. It speaks to the industrial scale of it all.
It does. The sheer depersonalized processing of death.
So facing this scene from hell, what was the impact on the soldiers, the liberators, psychologically?
Profound, deep, lasting shock. Disbelief, really. Even though they'd had briefings about Nazi atrocities, nothing prepared them for the reality of Dachau.
It was beyond anything they could have imagined.
Absolutely. We hear about soldiers literally getting sick, vomiting from the sights, the smells, and the emotional toll. Guys breaking down, crying, filled with this immense rage at what they were seeing.
There's that quote from Chaplain Eli Bonin.
Yes, he said it was indescribable, that the human mind just refused to believe it. He felt that everything they'd heard about Nazi horrors had actually underestimated the reality.
And some soldiers, like Private Richard Merowitz, felt this almost morbid compulsion.
Yeah, like an initial shock. Then this need to see more, to try and comprehend the incomprehensible, even knowing it would just get worse.
Don Greenbaum said nothing could prepare you. He said he'd never forget Dachau or that smell.
And for so many of them, these weren't just memories they could leave behind. They became haunting nightmares, contributing to long-term trauma. PTSD, though they didn't call it that then.
Sergeant Carl Seagrave. He was only 19. He said Dachau changed how he saw the enemy.
Right. He said he hadn't really felt hatred before, not even in combat. But Dachau, that was different. It gave him this visceral understanding of the evil they were fighting.
So for the liberators, it wasn't just shock and horror. It was also a kind of grim affirmation.
In a way, yes. A terrible, undeniable clarification of why they were fighting, what was at stake. It showed them the absolute barbarity of the regime they had to defeat.
Now, there was also the actual fighting during the liberation, brief as it was, and that incident with the German prisoners being shot.
Yes, there was that initial firefight with the SS guards. But then, yes, this deeply troubling incident occurred where a young American soldier started shooting unarmed German prisoners who had surrendered.
And Sparks intervened.
Immediately, Brigadier General Sparks stepped in, fired his pistol in the air, and ordered the shooting to stop. It was a critical moment.
Preventing it from escalating into a massacre.
Exactly. Upholding the rules of war even amidst that cauldron of emotion and horror. The estimates are that somewhere between 30 and 50 German guards were killed during the liberation itself, and over 1,000 were taken prisoner.
Sparks also mentioned seeing some prisoners taking revenge, didn't he?
He did. He described seeing liberated inmates attacking other prisoners they identified as capos, or informers, those who had collaborated with the SS guards.
Understandable in a way after years of torment.
A raw explosion of pent-up rage and a desperate, brutal kind of justice being meted out in those first chaotic hours. It shows the intense dynamics within the prisoner population itself.
So let's shift back to the survivors. For them, liberation. It's described as an unfathomable event. The overwhelming feeling must have been relief.
Immense relief. Joy. Gratitude. The accounts are full of descriptions of survivors just weeping, cheering the soldiers, rushing towards them.
Kissing their hands, clinging to them.
Yes, symbols of salvation arriving. And apparently, for the Jewish survivors, seeing Jewish American soldiers among the liberators was particularly powerful, almost unbelievable for them.
A tangible sign of hope from people like them. But initially, they weren't allowed to leave.
No, not immediately. They were told they had to stay within the camp confines for a little while.
That must have been confusing. Freedom, but not quite yet.
I imagine so. But it was largely practical. They needed medical attention, food, shelter. The camp needed to be secured and organized. Significant supplies, food and medicine, arrived the next day, which was crucial. That really marked the beginning of the recovery process.
But physical liberation, that's one thing. The mental scars, the trauma, that would last a lifetime.
Absolutely. The sources are clear on that. The psychological and emotional wounds were incredibly deep and enduring for so many.
We mentioned Elly Gotz deciding to stop hating. That must have been an immense internal struggle.
A conscious choice to reclaim his life, essentially. Jerry Convoy spoke of a dark shadow that always remained. David Lenga said the memories of the brutal labor would haunt him forever.
And from this trauma came a powerful resolve for many, didn't it? That phrase, never forget, never again.
Yes. It became a mission for so many survivors, a moral obligation to bear witness, to tell their stories, to speak out against hate and discrimination in all its forms.
Their testimony is just invaluable.
Absolutely vital. Irrefutable evidence, powerful reminders of where unchecked hatred can lead. And it's worth noting, some survivors, like Nick Hope, incredibly, found their own path to forgiveness eventually.
Which is just remarkable considering what they endured. So after the liberation, what happened to the Dachau site itself?
Well, first, it was used to house the thousands of survivors who were too sick to travel, a makeshift hospital, essentially. Then, from 45 to 48, the U.S. military used it to intern captured Nazis and SS members.
The Dachau trials happened there.
Yes, significantly. The trials for many perpetrators were held right there on the grounds of the camp where the crimes were committed, a powerful symbol of justice.
And after the trials?
It had a few other uses. A reception camp for expelled ethnic Germans from Eastern Europe for a while, then even a U.S. military base until 1960.
Before it finally became the memorial site.
Exactly. The Dachau concentration camp memorial site was established to preserve the memory, document what happened, and most importantly, educate future generations. It's a place for remembrance, reflection, and learning.
And now, for this 80th anniversary, there are specific events planned.
Yes, official commemoration ceremonies, religious services, and there's a new plaque being dedicated specifically to honor the U.S. Army's 45th Infantry Division for their role in the liberation.
That seems fitting.
The memorial site is also running special themed tours focusing just on the liberation story. But just a note, for anyone thinking of visiting the main memorial, will be closed to the public on Sunday, May 4th, 2025, for the official 80th anniversary ceremony.
Good to know. The message that comes through so strongly from survivors like Max Steinmetz, from the memorial, from history itself, is that imperative: never again.
We must make sure that it never happens again. Steinmetz's words are so powerful. This is the message which I want the world to remember: never again.
And one of our sources made an important point about not just focusing on Germany, right?
Yes, the need to acknowledge the broader context, the complicity of other nations, collaborationist regimes. Understanding the Holocaust requires looking at the whole picture, not isolating German guilt. A full, honest reckoning is crucial if we're truly to learn.
So, reflecting on all this, the liberation of Dachau, 80 years on, it's clearly so much more than just a historical event marking the end of a war.
Oh, absolutely. It's a pivotal moment. It revealed the absolute depths of human cruelty, yes, but also in the survival and the liberation itself, you see incredible resilience, a glimmer of hope triumphing over utter despair.
And the stories, the personal accounts from both survivors and liberators, they offer such powerful lessons about resilience, yes, but also about the lasting impact of witnessing horror and why remembrance is just so vital.
When you think about those personal stories and then you see how the site itself was transformed from this place of terror into a memorial focused on education, it really speaks volumes about our need as humans to confront our history, even the most painful parts.
It really does. Which brings us, I suppose, to a final thought for you, our listener. After delving into the liberation of Dachau, hearing these accounts,
And considering the world we live in now, where prejudice and discrimination and violence sadly still exist, the question really becomes, how do we ensure that resonant cry of never again isn't just a historical slogan? How do we individually and collectively keep it as a living, active commitment today, not just an echo from the past?